Welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast, now part of the Work Defined Podcast Network. Join us as we explore the vital role of compensation, strategy, data, and people analytics in navigating today's complex business world. With the resources of Work Defined, we're now bringing you deeper insights and actionable ideas from top experts. Now, here is your host, David Turetsky.
Hello and welcome to the HR Data Labs podcast. I am your host, David Turetsky. And like always, we try and find the best, the brightest, the most brilliant people inside and outside the world of HR. And today we have with us my friend, longtime guest on the program, Mark Stelzner from IA. Mark, how are you?
I'm getting by, as you know, from our conversation, but it's good to see you, Mark. Right?
Yeah.
Looking into it. Yeah,
me too. We actually had maybe a 20, 25-minute conversation. I know it actually felt like that, but it was only a 15-minute conversation before we got on the call, before we got on the episode. And it was, sometimes you catch up with old friends and you're like, wow, why don't we do this more often? And you realize when you're talking, the reason why we don't is because we're all so darn busy.
that's right. Yeah, no excuse, though. Breaking through with intention.
No.
Yep.
I know. We really do need to speak more. But Mark, tell people a little about what's going on with IA. And, we have a big anniversary this year, don't we?
Yeah, just in January, we turned 20, which is why I look so young and fresh. Over 20 years since I started this crazy band of misfits. But it's interesting. I was just talking to my team last week. We're somehow the beneficiary of the moment. So we're one of the firms that are actually growing through the chaos that's facing our entire industry and I'd say the world at work writ large. But with that comes a lot of responsibility and reflection, given the size and complexity of the organizations that for it. And also the fact that we're in high demand means, like we were discussing previously, that we need to be very intentional about finding space to refresh, relax, recharge, which is getting harder and harder, as you know.
I do. And with all the pressures on human resources and businesses in general to keep the wheels on and to roll toward a different destination now than we ever have. You were at the forefront of a lot of these things. And, we talked about this in the past, that HR is changing. And that's what we're going to be talking about today in our episode as our topic, how it's been changing over the last 20 years. But before we do, Mark, what's the one fun thing that no one knows about Mr. Stelzner?
Oh my gosh. You would think that I am a fantastic singer because of
Yeah, you got the voice for it.
It is terrible. I am a terrible singer. I have one go-to song, which is Sweet Caroline, but that's about it.
There you go.
That's all you're going to want to hear. So if you got a drinking, but people think, hey, it's karaoke night. Mark, get up and do it. No, I've got a face for radio, and
that's what my mom says.
It's about as far as I can go. So that's it.
Well, we're going to test that for you because I'm going to HR Tech this fall, and
Awesome.
We're going to go to a karaoke bar, and we're going to test that there, and then we're going to actually tape it, and we're going to let people judge for themselves.
Okay, done, sold.
All right, cool. Well, before we get into our topic, let's take one break for a commercial message. Hold on.
Hey, this is William Tincup. Listen, we did a series for iSolved called Heroes of HR, where we talk to HR practitioners. And these are just your run-of-the-mill, everyday, slogging it out, 300 employees in Cedar Rapids, HR pros. Mostly it's centered around iSolved and what they do with iSolved, but also they talk a lot about kind of the day-to-day rigor of HR. If you're curious about that, search for Heroes of HR wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.
So, Mark, the topic for today is, it's been 20 years since you started IA, and it's been a phenomenal run. And as you said, you're a victim of your own success, and you're one of those people that we look for answers to some of the hardest questions happening in the world of HR. And for those of us who've known you for a really long time, especially in compensation as well. So talk to me about what you've seen changing in the world of business. And then, the next question, we're going to get into the world of HR. And then after that, we're going to also talk about your world and how IA has changed as well. Not only commercial, but really as a way of being able to look back on how you've had to respond.
No, appreciate that. I mean, the pacing of everything has just accelerated to the point that we rarely have time to think. And, we're not here to make this necessarily about AI, but if we follow what AI promises now and we project that backwards, what's left now is the hard stuff, the heady stuff. Yeah. So if AI does what it's intended to do, the burden of being human will grow exponentially, and therefore the burden of being a leader in this function or a leader of an enterprise exponentially increases with pressure, expectations, and outcomes. And so what I see, certainly in the enterprises that we have the good graces of working with, that the notion of planning and then strategizing and then funding and then resourcing and then executing and then reflecting and learning and doing it again and again and again is antithetical to the world that we live in. So we had a potential opportunity recently that we turned down with a large pharma company, well-known pharma company, and they had asked us to come in and help them build a 5-year strategic plan. And my response was no. So they were really surprised. It's, well, you can hire anybody to do that, but at the end of the day, you just need one thing, which is a North Star, like something immovable, immutable that's going to steer you because you're going to get lost. But short of that, all we have are strong hypotheses and goals. No one can predict what will happen in 5 years. No one can execute on a 5-year plan. And so this pacing, this relentless pacing, combined, David, I would say, with the turnover that we're all leadership. So you combine faster expectations, shorter life cycles, and expectation for quicker and more efficient and effective delivery with the arrival of new leaders. It's just untenable. And that's what changed. Just the notion of time, the notion of performance. And
absolutely. And I love your example, Mark.
Yeah.
I love your example because we used to talk about 5, 10, 15-year outlooks, right? What's the company going to be in 5, 10, 15 years? And 15 years ago, that was okay because, to your point, the pace of change in organizations and large enterprises, other than M&A and other than real big market impacts like 2008 and one would argue some other big crises that we've had, like 2001, you'd say, well, yeah, I mean, a 5-year plan sounds pretty good, right? It sounds pretty short term.
That's right.
Nowadays, I think about how we talk about performance management. I'm not getting into HR yet. We talk about performance management. We talk about 1-year plans, and I'm like, how the hell can you do that? 3 months seems like a forever. When you're changing things up. So how is it that the enterprise has changed so dramatically? So where 5-year plans seem so ridiculous right now? I mean, is it AI or is it something completely different?
I think part of it is stakeholder expectations. Part of it is just a sense of currency. Like we reward currency, even social currency, right? If we think about the visualization of what we do, TikTok and Instagram coming and being in a material and meaningful way since I started this firm. So our incentives in consumption just have significantly shifted, and what we think we reward and award and what we think we incent versus actually how humans behave often aren't inextricably linked. And it's harder and harder to lead because you don't have much time. And so even when we think about the characteristics of leaders, it's always been a problem where if you take your highest performing individual contributors and you say, great, now you're going to be a people leader, doesn't mean one equals the other or should equal the other. But the notion of sort of individual contributor career paths, that didn't exist 20 years ago. And if it was, it was a rarity. It's probably because you're holding on to a terrible person who can't be with people, but they're a high performer. So you don't want to reward them. But all that to say is that with some notable exceptions, meaning sometimes there's family-run companies that have just sustained some manufacturing capabilities, their ways of working, but their brand and their reputation have maintained, simply extended into the modern era. Certainly there's industry focus associated with this, but the half-life to extinction in the corporate environment is getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And therefore the speed of displacement or disruption is faster and larger and faster and larger. And so
Yeah.
we spend more time looking over our shoulder or looking left and right than we do perhaps looking forward.
Look at the examples that really talk to what you're speaking about. Think about the BlackBerries, the research in motion. Think about Nokia. Think about AT&T or other notable information age companies that started with a bang, grew to being the monster in their category,
Right.
and then disappeared relatively quickly relative to their start. And then you have the Apples in the world that at one point in time, and I think it was around 2008, no, it wasn't 2008. It was a little earlier, maybe 2001 or 2002. They were almost extinct as well because the categories in which they were strong in were totally dominated by Microsoft and others. And then they started getting into a lot of other things like music and whatnot. Does it mean that an organization isn't looked at like a monolith like it used to be? And that disruption is more the name of the game rather than being the constant fear, but now it's the constant reality.
Yeah, and I think right now at a time of financial and societal unrest, there's a lot of people enjoying some happy hunting. Like we're finding what used to be operating companies are quickly moving into holding companies. Because they're finding these distressed assets and they bring them into their holdco in a way that, listen, I don't need everything to be profitable at exactly the same time. I don't need all to innovate at exactly the same pace. But if I balance my portfolio in a way that some high percentage of my assets are performing while we're investing in others, we can get overall operational lift as a holding company. And that's where like the rise of the holding company, we even think about, Meta. Meta, it was Facebook, it was Insta, right? Now it's Meta. We look at Google, the Alphabet, right? There was a need to sort of separate from the brand of the entity to diversify then as a holding company and bring in complementary assets and also potentially to fail and take distressed assets and either sell them for parts or simply shut them down because they didn't get the pickup perhaps that the market expected. So then for those of us that are trying to navigate this world, there's always tension in that system. There's tension in structure. There's tension in operating model. There's tension in decision authority, leadership. There's tension in market penetration and expansion. And so all that comes to life as what my team hears me refer to as complexity factors. So the complexity factors in organizations are just exponentially growing. While at the same time, honestly, I feel like those that are thriving are relatively small. And so we have bookends. It's hard to be in the middle right now. It's better to do one thing and do one thing incredibly well,
right?
Or better to own so many assets that a percentage of them doing well allows you to sustain your business. But being in that middle ground right now is a bit challenging, I think, for a lot of enterprises.
When I heard you talking, one of the things that kind of jumped out at me is when I was doing executive compensation modeling and when I was doing valuations, especially around Black-Scholes, we always talked about beta, right? And how high beta meant that there was significant opportunity for growth and significant value. Now, do we see, based on what you just said, do we see beta as a good thing or do we see it as a really bad thing? Because you can have those small companies that you mentioned at the end rise up and overtake you because they're more nimble. They may actually even have a smaller beta because the growth pattern is relatively linear. And so it's not like all over the place, which is what beta is measuring. So is it bad? Is beta good or is beta bad in this environment?
I think it depends on the context and where you find yourself in an organization. If you're growing, investing, if you can self-fund and self-invest and self-grow, I think it's still healthy. I still think it creates the type of latitude, flexibility that one needs to actually thrive, especially during times of duress. I feel like when you're linear and, dare I say, single-threaded, that thread gets cut or trimmed, you're done. So there's so much risk profiling and risk assessment that I see organizations doing as well, which we spend as much time protecting our flank as we do trying to advance. And And again, all this is tensions in systems. We thought we had a great product, but then supply chain gets disrupted. We might be oil based, but suddenly the oil supply, we wars and so the speed
Well,
of
between tariffs and wars, what hasn't gotten disrupted?
right. So you're standing on quicksand and you don't even know it until you're sinking. And that's what's I think for leaders right now is you're having to place bets. We've always had to place bets with imperfect information, but the light can be swept in any corner of our enterprise for any purpose, many of which are out of our control, that we create this facade of control and decision authority when in fact, we're just absorbing and moving. And that fluidity, frankly, is probably the healthiest way to lead right now because of the fact that we can't really be static. And not that we ever were, but we can't be as static for as long as perhaps we contemplated previously.
But going back to your other point about being a holding company in this world, it seems like that's an amoebic behavior, where you bring assets in and depending upon the market and the economic and the social economic world that we're in, one will flourish while the other one suffers. There's no more of the, hey, there's high margin in this and there's lower margin in that, and yay, we're going to balance it all out. It's, what aren't we getting attacked on right now? What are these vectors to where we're shooting for, and how do we keep that? How do we keep above water with all of that?
Yeah. Well, and I think of this, we often talk about catalysts, like we're the transformation business. So like, what are the catalysts for transformation? Easy and obvious things, divestitures, M&A activity, the arrival of a new leader, a particular investment thesis relative to tools or technology. Like these are all change agents to bring things forward. The benefit of the collapsing of multiple entities into one, or the collision of multiple entities to one, is you do have to actually have a point of view. And what we find, particularly in the work that we do, it's the lack of establishing a firm and fixed point of view on our processes, on our tools, on our expectations, on our policies, all the dependencies that are required for us to execute at scale.
Right.
And the hyperlocalization of issues that are completely out of our control, the need for us to actually force ourselves to be a bit process-led, tech-enabled, to actually unify our ways of working. You can't sustain 100 versions of something for very long. It's too expensive. It's too resource intensive. So, again, amongst the pros and cons, as everything become homogenous and we lose identity, that certainly is a con, sort of the streamlining or efficiency that comes with some of these, but forcing us to actually look ourselves in the mirror and say, in lieu of us taking a decision, all we're doing is perpetuating chaos, which there is certainly a necessity of us to take stock, decide what we're going to win on. And these are the conversations we're really having now that are newer. We still have to do all the things.
Right.
But what do we not care about? I mean, really, conversations of we're even willing to risk litigation because we can't, we got 8 people in this country. I kind of can't worry about it. And if it comes, it's minimally viable. What's market parity? To compete in the market in which we offer our goods or services, this is what's required. But we're going to win on this. Those are more the discussions we're having now. And we've always thought about that commercially. But I would say in terms of enabling functions like finance or IT or HR, the conversation is bringing to the forefront more so than I've ever seen it before. Because in lieu of taking a position, we're going to be moved past. And the cost pressures and growth pressures are colliding in such a way that we can't sideline this anymore. We can't just be on our heels. We got to get on toes pretty quickly.
Is what you said because, and I'm kind of leaning into the comment you made about we can't wait anymore, we got to do. Is that because regulatory agencies are kind of suffering right now and we're willing to roll the dice and gamble a little bit, that they're not going to look at us? They've got so many other fish to fry right now and there's so many other areas to look at. I'm willing to gamble a little bit on that. Or is it that operationally we have to take advantage of the situations we're in, and if we don't, somebody else will?
I think, organizations spend a lot of time talking about their EVP, their value, their goals, their mission, and their vision. And the asterisk is getting a little bit larger, in my opinion, right now. Because the notion is again, this applies to all. There's equanimity and everything that we do. When we mean this for all, and we mean this for all in all situations, in all locations, across all population types. And I think, again, more out of necessity than design, we can't afford for that to be true anymore. And this is sad, by the way. I'm not amplifying this as something like I'm super thrilled about. But now organizations are saying, listen, we've shrunk. So go back to our domain here, David. The people function gets smaller and has to do more, smaller and has to do more. So we can't federate ourselves to support the edges of our bell curve. So we have to think about t-shirt sizes, right? What's our extra small, medium, large, extra large based on population or impact or where we're intending to grow. They're going to get sadly more of X, Y, or Z than perhaps their smaller peers where, 10 people quit, we're out of that country or we're out of that market because, that's ebbing and flowing. And it's expensive to maintain a footprint. It's expensive to have this many business units, to have this many leaders. There's a cost to operations that come into the business. So we have to make these choices. And it's a bit of a gut check, in my opinion, David, for the organization, because it's causing us to recognize that those were aspirational, maybe inspirational. But for most organizations, they're not factual or functional. Like it's very difficult to sustain that high bar of expectation that we all set for ourselves for very long for everyone. And so behind closed doors, we acknowledge not everyone is unfortunately created equal in the organization, and therefore that manifests in service and investment and support and benefits and comp and all the other things that certainly we know about. And whether it's spoken or unspoken, inequity continues to grow.
Go back to the first set of conversations we were having about the timeframes and the 5, 10, 15-year viewpoints. There used to be a time when we would never even consider shutting down, a well-established office in a location. We would do whatever we could to rally the troops and to keep that organization afloat because our customers meant so much to us in those markets.
Right.
Nowadays, fast forward to 2026, we're going to jettison that entire market because it's unsustainable in the ways in which, if we lose those 10 people, there's no coming back from that. They're going to our competitors or they're starting their own shop or whatever. And the litigation as well as everything else in order to keep that office alive or that location alive. We got to move on to the next one. Our opinion has now changed, right? I mean, the operating model has to change.
Absolutely. And the speed at which we can gain or lose, or the speed at which our own operational efficiency has to shift based on the state of the world, honestly. We look at even something like supply chain. We look at supply chain disruption. Well, out of necessity, this country will go dormant or no longer be in effect. Those subcontractors will lose their jobs. But just as quickly, we've got an insatiable market over here that is ready to catch our work. So we whack them all down and we can, but it's the nature of speed. And because we're so globalized now that the barriers to entry into both entering and exiting markets are shorter than ever before. But the statutory compliance is also getting more and more complex. So we make decisions. And that goes into certainly more conversations I'm seeing now than before around HR taking on total workforce management.
Yeah.
Visibility into contract labor pools, even the notion of who owns these relationships, procurement eventually sort of grew and systems grew. That happened over the last 20 years where, David, you might be a line of business leader. You've got your own pool of people that you trust. You can contract with them and fire them, hire them, provision them as you see fit. But when all work becomes, we're all contractors, right? In our own way. All work becomes closer to contract work. The difference between what we consider an employer FTE versus contractor seasonal labor, we can't really see much daylight between them. And so the idea of dynamically provisioning resources with skills to do work, well, it makes sense that HR now takes that on because we're trying to manifest skills to provision outcomes. Do we really care where the skills come from as long as we're getting? And is it easier to frankly turn on that spigot or turn off that spigot of contract labor? Well, it is factually and functionally. So,
but with the assault on HR, and I'm talking more about the bolt.coms of firing HR and creating operations. Well, I'm actually just talking about how it's harder to be an HR person today because of all the tensions in business, within businesses, within countries, with regulatory bodies and everything. It's so difficult to be an HR person no matter what the different, aspect that we focused on, whether it's recruiting or compensation or benefits or whatever. It's so hard that it becomes almost a fait accompli that, as you were talking about, that leader who has those relationships is going to, create MSAs with a GP, for example, and be able to establish a beachhead in a different country because they know somebody with GP, they figure out an opportunity, they're going to go do it and then ask for permission later or ask for forgiveness later.
That's
And
right.
then HR comes back and goes, well, how am I supposed to support this long term? Our HRITs don't support having non-US employees. Well, GP will take care of that. Don't worry about that. That's all in their contract.
Right. Exactly. And that's it. So the operational execution pressure then says now my provider or vendor management ecosystem needs to be equally dynamic. I need to be able to provide extension of support, care, services, again, with a bit of a switch of turning on and off. I mean, even negotiations with the leading HR and payroll providers are different now because of massive fluctuations in populations. So the notion like, here's a minimally viable commit to maintain this price point. Okay, we're talking now tranches that go plus X percent, minus X percent that have to be pre-negotiated because we might shrink and I'm not going to be tethered to a contract that's going to cause me to shrink over time while maintaining a baseline that isn't real. So
they're all based on PEPMs too, which means that your base expense is based on that baseline.
That's right. And so if you're stuck, but you're a flagging asset, or that you're likely to do high people displacement due to digital investments, everything's being revisited. And so it puts tension on the entire ecosystem. But the growth elasticity that third parties then can provide you, those markets are growing. Big BPO, like the heydays of HR BPO, like early 2000s, it's back again.
Yeah.
The portals from the mid 90s, like they're back. Like what's old is new again. It's just the context in which we're applying them is significantly different. Yeah.
Well, in the old days, the portals had people behind them. They had a call center behind them. They had IVR. It wasn't AI. It was the precursors to AI, right? It was an outsourced person that would answer your call, and you didn't care where they were. They were in the cloud. It didn't matter whether they were in Idaho or they were in Prague, whether they were in the Philippines. Probably not the Philippines back then, but we were somewhere else. They may have been in Salt Lake City. Now we're getting to a situation where you may be talking to an AI who is trained in Salt Lake City or in the Philippines or in Prague, but this disembodiment of that support is it higher level support, or is it maintaining the same crap that we've been dealt for the last 20 years? And I guess going to the next part of our conversation about HR and how HR has changed or how it hasn't changed in the last 20 years, have we been focusing on the wrong things? Have we been trying to be the everything to the company? And have we missed the boat on trying to be what we needed to be, which was that business partner we've always talked about, the business partner who was more value added. We gave up the administrative crap to the technology a long time ago. Have we kind of missed that boat, and now AI is eating our lunch on everything, even strategy?
I think part of the problem is we think we can technology our way out of every problem that is. And the market continues to reinforce the thesis by producing more and more venture-funded, PE-funded tools and technology. Tens of thousands of capabilities that are very difficult for one to validate, consume, integrate, maintain, and deploy. And what we found is, we're getting just as behind and have been, frankly, for some time in the cloud as we used to on-prem. And the reason is we're taking releases turned off, right? We're releasing these capabilities, but what's not mandatory, we're not absorbing. We're not taking the release notes. We're not socializing that. EOEs aren't saying, oh, this would be accretive to me in this following way. We're not doing sprints of releases, et cetera. So most of the value that was inferred of a one-to-many model that came through SaaS or the promise of enterprise SaaS is not being utilized. When we look at the enterprises that we work with, they're fractionally using the licensed tools and technologies that they've purchased because the thought was delivered technology is going to overcome the foundational shortcomings that we have internally. So when I think about What hasn't changed, the underlying like non-sexy dependencies haven't changed. Go back to our portal example from the one whole minutes ago. Content. Okay. We thought we could kind of get away with crap content for a long time because content
had.
Well, and it was in David's head. So we had to have the expert, but the expert didn't have to write it down. Well, then the expert wrote it down. And then we realized, well, when the expert wrote it down, we've got 150,000 variations, but at least we've got the expert and we've got it written down. Now all AI exposes is the chaos underneath, is bad data, is bad processes, is bad, a lack of authoritative content. And to be helpful, it'll just bring it into the square for us all to chaotically navigate or say, that's not right, or that's not pertinent, or that's not localized to me. So taking the human out of the loop, but not putting the human back into building a stronger foundation for growth is a mistake that certainly we've made. And we're paying for that right now because it's slowing the ability for us to consume capability. But on the flip side, if I'm a CPO today, which again, think about even the naming convention has changed, right? I'm a chief people officer, not a chief human resources officer. It's not about us in HR. It's about the people that we serve. Certainly even the titling has evolved and changed across the organizations. I'm wearing 3 hats that I've got to keep moving. I'm spinning these plates at exactly the same time. One, I'm the business partner to the CEO and to the president of my organization. And I'm the senior peer to my C-suite. This bullshit seat at the table stuff has been gone for a long time. We're standing on the table. We're at the centerpiece of the table.
We're not dancing on a table.
Yeah, well, sometimes we're dancing if we're still hosting parties, but God forbid, some of that hasn't changed, unfortunately.
Don't have fun, Mark. Don't have fun.
Overhang. But like that demands a lot of time and attention. And when we talk about turnover then, well, guess who's working on the turnover? Who's working through these very sensitive searches as we continue to displace and replace peer groups within the C-suite? Even board turnover is just to the chief people officer. Then I run a P&L. I've got a function. I've got a budget. I've got capital projects. I've got headcount. I've got to run HR, whatever we call it.
Right.
And then third is I'm still the flag bearer for what it means to be a good contributor to the organization.
Right.
So I'm personification of the optimum talent, of ways of working, of behavioral change. I'm the spokesperson still. So when we've got tension across those 3 different roles, you get dragged asunder constantly, and you're always having to give something up. The more CPOs I talk to wish they had a COO, wish they had some...
And a CFO, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah, to run HR, to run the P&L. So the transformation office is new. We work disproportionately with large enterprises. So the advent of the transformation office, not as a project, but as a continuous function that has projects, programs, and initiatives, holds the HR budget, sustains the capital budget in partnership with IT or operations, is the proxy to finance for expectations, works with corporate strategy very quietly and securely to align to maybe moves that haven't been disclosed. So like the new advent of what we do in what order with what dependencies. How do we provision resources and dollars? How do we secure business cases? But also this notion of we're constantly prioritizing and deprioritizing. We need a function that wakes up every day. That function didn't exist 20 years ago. There was a project maybe, and we cut a logo cake at the end.
Right.
But this is now this way of working.
Kaizans do we have to, go to change the way we did shit?
Exactly. But if you put an AI tool, put Copilot against the Outlook calendar or Gemini against the Google calendar of a CPO, you will very quickly see where she is spending most of her time. Not necessarily because she wants to, but because she has to. So we're in the mix of everything, which is what we wanted, but we're not staffed to be able to support it, unfortunately.
What I didn't hear you talk about, which was really important, especially during the pandemic, is that cultural leader. The person who keeps everybody enthusiastic to keep working despite horrible stuff that was going on in our world. Right. People dying around us and the support we needed to not lose our freaking minds because our way of working completely changed 100% in one day.
That's right.
Or 1 week.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we started working differently. Our kids were home and they were around us, and our spouses were home, and that caused a lot of stuff as well. And 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 so, and I don't mean for you to comment negatively on what you were saying, because I think what you were saying is that now the CPO has to look beyond culture. They have to put their pom poms down, and because I've had pom poms, believe me, I've had pom poms as a CPO, and no one gave a crap about that. That was part of what I did anyways.
Well, and what you've
But
done is you've distributed the load to the expectation of being a business leader of any shape and kind, is that this is now hyper localized to your function, to your people, because the storyline isn't universal anymore. It could be that the contact center function is getting decimated and replaced through agentic enablement, right? So that's a very different cultural story than the finance function, right? Is looking for more efficiency and effectiveness relative to time to close on a quarterly basis.
Right.
Well, a very different incentive plan relative to the sales or marketing functions, right? Which are thinking about growth or customer reach or customer sentiment or relationship management in a different way. And our supply, we've got to be able to cut the line and reestablish the line for manufacturing, more dynamic manufacturing. So because we're so complicated, and we always were complicated, like, let's just be honest, there wasn't ever truly one storyline, but at least the feeling was the storyline was the ground level, and we can then do variations. The ground level isn't consistent anymore. So we can't sell the same, I should say. I actually said sell. I probably meant it on one level. We can't sell the same story.
Right.
That we used to, because it's not true. And one thing I do find is HR leaders still, and always have, not wanted to be disingenuous to their people. So the notion of pom-poms, you might find maybe there's a direct correlation or causation. I haven't done the research. If I'm not hearing from my CPO as much, that might signal that we don't necessarily have good news to share.
Yeah. And we've seen that happen very recently, where the bad news is coming from the CEO, obviously. I mean, in many ways, that's the place it should emanate from. But their messages have not been checked with the head of HR or the CPO, because the messages suck. They're really bad at delivering really bad news.
Yeah, and I would say that's why we're seeing a lot of turnover at that level as well, because what got us here isn't going to get us there has always been true, but it's certainly true now. And a lot of people who are at a nexus point of the belief system of what an organization stood for and what they built their career on, it's somewhat unrecognizable in many cases right now. And so these decisions or investments at the expense of, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, HR in the room is the one waving their hand saying, I don't know if we should do this. I don't think this is right, or this doesn't match to what we claim we are. And if it's done nonetheless, then I was overruled, which means my purpose here is probably not
right. Exactly. And what do they do then? Because if they are tied to those decisions, Mark, it's got their stamp on it.
That's right. Either implied or explicit. And that's why a lot of people exit, or HR gets dragged, in the sense of, I was the executioner, right? Why?
Exactly.
How could this have happened? And then, that's going to cause me to go deeper and deeper inside, to not want to raise my hand and say, I'm the flag bearer yet again, right? More focused on operational efficiency. So, all that is causing turmoil, like internal turmoil. I talk to a lot of CPOs that are honestly in tears out of both frustration, exhaustion, and just a sheer recognition of the fact that I don't know if I can do this, whatever this is right now, for very much longer, at least how it's,
And maybe there is some truth to that. And I want to get to a third question, which is how IA has changed as well. But before we do, let's touch on that a little bit. We were talking before we got on the episode about how our lives have changed. And maybe there does need to be a change in what people operations or HR or the office of people, or whatever you're going to call it, is HR. Maybe it does need to be different. And I'm not getting on a soapbox and saying we need to be something different. I'm a comp guy by background. I don't love all the pieces of HR, to be honest. Let's be honest. There are some things I hate, like performance management. I'll just say it right there. But maybe we do need a comeuppance. Maybe there needs to be a bit of an upheaval in HR, and it needs to shake up.
Yeah, and I think we have been through that upheaval in waves and with spikes and valleys over the last 2+ decades, 30 years that I've in this industry for sure. So I don't think that narrative is necessarily different.
Right.
But I think what's changed, if I go back to something I said a little bit earlier, the work that's going to be left for us, meaning our human work where we put our hearts, where we put our minds, our opportunity cost, et cetera, is heavy and heady.
Mm.
Because what we will do, because frankly, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Trillions of dollars are invested in our AI overlords. It's going to come true one way or another.
Sure.
So that train isn't going to stop or even be derailed or distracted. It's happening. And if one organization says, I'm not okay with that ethically, 5 more will pop up to say, I don't have that hangout. What do you want to do? And how do
Exactly.
So, we're dealing with, too much of everything. But what's left? When we separate all that noise, if you're an HR business partner and you want to be helpful, which inherently I think almost everyone wants to be, but certainly within HR, and you strip out the transactional, which has always been the goal, right? I mean, how long we talked about elevating to more strategic value add. What is left is pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It's heavy work. It's analytical work. It's strategic work. It's ODOE work. It's the super confidential work of the manifestation of the other things that we've been talking about, which is the shifting change of what it means to work at all. And so elevating into that while we commoditize the capabilities that take up some relatively high percentage of our HR capacity and our end-to-end processes means, in your world for compensation, are we going to go to dynamic skills-based compensation? Right? Do we, but what's left? Can we really, is market data really going to work in the future world? Do we even need employees and what the notion of full-time equivalency looks like?
Yeah.
Do comp ratios really matter? Do I want everyone to be contract? Like all the stuff that we're going to have to question everything, which pay parity and other initiatives are forcing, which is good. It's right in front of us, but it means we don't actually get the relief. I was just talking to my own team about this a couple of weeks ago. Like sometimes I don't mind booking my own travel.
Okay.
I like sending a calendar invite. I don't mind drafting an email. I don't mind logging into a system because I just need a break on the mental load.
Right.
I don't think we're prepared for 8-10 hours a day of what will be left, honestly. And that's going to require us to rethink our function and our expectation of what it means to work and therefore our employees writ large.
You and I could have multiple episodes on how the HR changes because of what you just said. And you mentioned before, we were talking about workforce management and how the changing expectations about the break from the 5, 10, 15-year plan down to the, how are we going to manage within this year and how does HR take on workforce management? There's a lot of data there. I love that. But we should talk about that in another episode. I wanted to speak a little quickly about I and how it has changed over the last 20 years, because I want to give you a little opportunity to kind of be proud. You're a proud papa here. You should be proud of what your organization has achieved over the last 20 years.
Yeah. And it's funny, my team brought up a picture that I had from 2006 and boy, I'm paying the price, my friend. But it's funny. I talk to a lot of people now, as you might imagine. Sustaining a business for this long is difficult and challenging. And part of it is we give ourselves permission to throw away anything at any time, but at least so annually we gather, we question what we've done, how we've done it, what we've learned along the way. And we're constantly having to change as well. If we were static, first of all, this would be terribly boring work.
Sure.
Times it can be terribly boring work just to say it, but we've got to keep this interesting and we've got to move at the same pace that our clients are moving.
Right.
And we've got to make this interesting for our people to get the level of engagement and certainly longevity that we've been grateful to experience. But so part of like when I coach people a lot of people are going on their own right now, because again, the barrier to start Turetsky consulting is low, right? Like you can get it going really fast. So mistakes I made that in hindsight I could have avoided, that I have changed as a result. You think you need all the clients. You don't. You need statistically, like mathematically, you can only absorb a certain capacity. You need a fraction of your addressable market. There's a perception you need to be able to do all the things. No, you need to be able to do one thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you get caught. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm, good. Yeah. Mm, right. 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 Mm, mhm. Yeah. No, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And Mark, I just want to note one thing. For those people who don't know Mark very well, Mark has been one of those people that you can rely on. His reputation precedes him. For those of us who know him and love him, he has been a constant source of not only insight, but of truth. And whether you 100% buy into whatever he says or whatever I say, it doesn't matter because that's part of what he was just saying. It's part of his truth. And I have enjoyed the past 20 years listening to him and knowing him. And I'm looking forward to another 40 years of hearing from Mark Stelzner and his viewpoint. So, Mark, we're going to do this again sooner. I really appreciate your time. It's so valuable to me and to my listeners and viewers. We really do appreciate you. Exactly. Exactly. Love it. And, I'm one of those weeks I get up in the morning, I go, I got Mark Stelzner in my calendar. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the HR Data Labs podcast. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share it with your network. You can also check out the recordings on Spotify or the HR channel, now on Roku and Fire TV. Thank you, take care, and stay safe.